I was standing on the observation deck of Galactic Station when it happened. The deck was crowded that day, full of diplomats and traders from a dozen species, all waiting for the broadcast the three in assembly had promised. They said it would be a lesson. They said every young species needed to see it, so we would understand our place. I did not know it would be a child. Her name was Mira Ose. She was 7 years old. Her parents worked in the water reclamation division on the lower ring of the station. I had met her once, in the cafeteria, when she asked me why my ears didn't move like the three in guards' ears did. I told her humans just weren't built that way. She laughed and said that was boring, and I agreed, and that was the whole conversation. That was all I had of her. The Threeans said she broke a law. They said her family had entered a restricted archive by mistake, some old data vault that technically belonged to the assembly. It was not sabotage, it was not theft. It was a mistake, the kind any child could make while waiting for her parents to finish a shift. But the Threeans didn't care about mistakes. They cared about sending a message to every new species in the galaxy. Obey us, or this is what happens. They chose a child because they wanted the message to hurt. They knew humans protected their young above almost everything else. They thought that by breaking that one soft place in us, they would break our will entirely. The broadcast played across every public screen in known space. I watched it because I could not look away, and because some small, foolish part of me hoped it would stop before the end. It did not stop. When it was over, the screen went dark, and for a moment, nobody on the observation deck moved. Nobody spoke. Even the Threean officers standing near the door looked satisfied, like they had just finished a job well done. I looked around at the humans on that deck. There were maybe a dozen of us, 2 shipping officers, a translator, a young engineer, myself, a few others. None of us cried out. None of us shouted. We simply looked at each other, and something passed between us, something I cannot fully describe even now. It was not shock, it was recognition. The Threeans mistook our silence for despair. I heard one of their attachés whisper to another, in their own language, thinking none of us understood. See, they break easily. No war, no anger, just grief. This species will be simple to manage. He was wrong. He had no idea how wrong he was. I want to explain something about humans, something the rest of the galaxy never understood, because we never explained it well. We are a species that spent thousands of years fighting each other over land, and food, and ideas. But somewhere in all of that fighting, we built one rule that almost every human culture agreed on, even when we agreed on nothing else. You do not harm a child. Not for war, not for punishment, not for any reason at all. It became the one line that even our worst wars tried not to cross. When someone crossed it anyway, in our own history, the response was never soft. It was never slow. It was always total. The Threeans did not know this rule. They had studied our economy, our ships, our trade agreements, our polite diplomats who smiled and signed treaties and never raised their voices. They thought that was the whole of us. They had no idea we had simply never been given a reason to show them anything else. Now they had given us one. I did not know it yet, standing on that deck, but somewhere far above us, in orbit stations and quiet embassies and freighters that had been just passing through, a dozen systems, human officers were already opening sealed orders. I found out later that those orders had existed for years, updated quietly, waiting. Not orders for war, orders for judgment. The first 10 minutes after the broadcast were the strangest of my life. The humans around me did not panic. We did not cry, not where anyone could see. We stood very still, and I remember my hands were shaking, but my mind felt strangely clear, like a fog had lifted. I looked at my comm device and saw a message arrive, short and simple, sent to every human citizen across the station. Remain calm, remain together. This will be addressed. That was all it said, no details, no promises of revenge, just those 11 words. And somehow, that was enough to steady me. Around minute 10, I noticed the Threean officers near the door start checking their own devices more often. Their calm confidence was fading, replaced by something twitchy and uncertain. I did not understand why yet. I would later learn that human ships across a dozen systems had begun changing course at almost the exact same moment, moving towards specific coordinates with a discipline that looked less like panic and more like rehearsal. That was because it was Rehearsal. We had prepared for this exact moment for longer than most species in the galaxy had known we existed. By minute 15, communication channels across the sector were flooded, not with human shouting or threats, but with something quieter and colder. Silence on the frequencies the Threans expected us to use, replaced by encrypted human traffic moving in patterns no one outside our species could read. I watched a Threan communications officer stare at his console like it had betrayed him. Ships that had been logged as simple cargo vessels, medical transports, even a diplomatic ferry that had docked at Galactic Station just days earlier, were no longer where they were supposed to be, and when their new positions became clear, the pattern was unmistakable. They were not fleeing, they were closing in. I remember an old comment made months earlier by a human ambassador, one I hadn't thought much about at the time. A Threan minister had asked her, almost mockingly, when humanity planned to build up its real defenses, since our ships all seemed built for trade rather than war. She had smiled and said, "We don't threaten. We just finish preparing." Everyone at that meeting had laughed politely and moved on. I remembered her words now, and I understood them for the first time. By minute 20, the mood on the observation deck had changed completely. The Threan officers were no longer standing with folded arms and satisfied expressions. They were talking quickly among themselves, voices low and urgent, occasionally glancing toward the humans in the room, as if we might suddenly transform into something dangerous right there in front of them. We did not move. We did not need to. The people doing the work were far away, and they did not need permission from anyone standing on that deck to finish what they had started. At minute 25, the lights in the station flickered, just once, and every screen in the room switched to an emergency channel none of us had ever seen used before. It displayed a single message in a dozen languages, including Threan script, appearing all at once across every terminal on the station. This station's defense grid has been suspended. This is not an act of war against your people. This is a response to the execution of a human child. Those responsible will answer to human authority. All others will not be harmed. 2 minutes later, at the 27th minute since the broadcast had ended, the station's shields dropped. I felt it more than saw it, a strange pressure change in the air, the hum of systems shutting down all at once. Alarms did not sound. There was no explosion, no chaos, no destruction spreading across the station. It was something far quieter and, somehow, far more frightening. Total control, exercised without a single wasted motion. Human vessels that had been quietly gathering for the past 20 minutes now sat visible in the space around Galactic Station, close enough to be seen from the observation windows. They did not fire. They did not need to. Every weapon system on the station, every defense measure the Threans had trusted completely, had simply gone silent, disabled from within by systems that had been embedded in the station's own infrastructure long before that day, waiting for this exact moment. The tribunal responsible for Mira's execution, the officials who had ordered the broadcast, who had chosen a child because they believed it would break us, were removed from the station within the hour. I did not see how it was done, and I was glad of that. I only know that by evening, they were no longer anywhere on Galactic Station, and human authorities had made clear, calmly and without threats, that they would face judgment according to human law for a crime committed against a human citizen. No other lives were lost that day. That part mattered more than anything else to me, and I think it mattered to every human who took part in what happened. This was never about destruction. It was never about proving how much damage we could do. It was about showing, clearly and completely, that some lines could never be crossed without consequence, and that we had never been the soft, unprepared species everyone assumed us to be. We had simply chosen, for a long time, not to show the rest of the galaxy what we were capable of, because we hoped we would never need to. In the days that followed, I watched the reactions ripple outward across a dozen species. Ambassadors who had once spoken to human delegates with quiet condescension now chose their words with visible care. Reports circulated about human infrastructure across the sector, about ships and stations that had turned out to hold far more capability than anyone had accounted for. Species that had barely acknowledged our existence before suddenly wanted meetings, wanted clarity, wanted reassurance that this would not happen to them. We gave that reassurance freely. We had never wanted war. We still do not. But we made one thing clear. In every meeting that followed, In every treaty renegotiated in the weeks after, humanity would protect its people, and especially its children, without hesitation and without limit. Anyone who mistook our patience for weakness would only make that mistake once. I think about Mira often. I think about the conversation we had in the cafeteria, about ears and boredom, about how ordinary that moment felt, how little either of us knew about what would come after. I think about her parents, who I saw once more, weeks later, standing quietly at a small memorial the human community built near the station's central garden. I did not know what to say to them, so I said nothing, and simply stood beside them for a while. Sometimes that is the only thing you can offer. The galaxy learned something about us in those 27 minutes that we had never bothered to announce, because we hoped we would never have to prove it. We are not a species that reacts quickly out of anger. We are a species that reacts completely, once we have decided that a line has been crossed. We do not warn twice. We do not forgive slowly, and when someone hurts one of our children, the response will not be sentiment. It will be judgment, delivered calmly, delivered fully, and delivered without apology. That is what the Threans learned that day, standing in the wreckage of their own confidence, watching a species they had underestimated show them exactly how much restraint they had been living under until that moment. I still work at Galactic Station. The observation deck looks the same as it always did, glass and steel, and a view of the stars that never gets old. But I notice, now, that the aliens who pass through no longer speak to humans with the same easy dismissal they once did. They watch us more carefully. They choose their words with more care. And sometimes, when a human child walks through the station corridors, laughing about something small and ordinary, I see other species pause and step aside, quietly, without being asked. They remember now. They understand, finally, what should have been obvious from the beginning. Some things are simply not meant to be tested. Not with us. Not ever again.